My name is Taylor Hughes, and I was standing in a military courtroom staring at the man who taught me everything about power, my father. He sat at the plaintiff's table, posture rigid, suit pressed so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. Beside him, Judge Richard Vance leaned back in his chair with the casual authority of a man who thought the verdict was already his to give. Their eyes met for a brief second, a silent exchange, and my stomach tightened. I'd seen that look my entire life, the quiet certainty that I was already beaten. The air in the room was cold, metallic. Every objection my attorney raised was overruled before it even landed. Witnesses who could have cleared my name had been barred from testifying. My father didn't need to smirk. He'd built the entire stage and cast every player. All I was supposed to do was lose on cue. But I didn't stand 15 years in uniform to be told when to bow my head. When Vance tried to admit yet another unverified report into evidence, I felt the heat rise in my chest. I pushed back my chair. The legs scraped against the polished floor, loud enough to make heads turn. Every step toward the microphone was measured, my boots clicking like a metronome, counting down the last moments of their advantage. I didn't look at my father. I didn't look at the judge. I looked straight ahead and let my voice carry just far enough to reach every corner of the room. Night Falcon. The words cut through the air like a blade through canvas. The gallery went silent. A colonel in the back lowered his pen mid-note. Someone near the door shifted, hand to their earpiece. Across the aisle, my father's smirk faltered for the first time. And just like that, the fight stopped belonging to them. The moment I stepped into that courtroom earlier that morning, I knew it wasn't built for truth. It was built for control. The high ceilings and polished wood weren't there to impress me. They were there to remind me where I stood on the chain of command. My attorney, Captain Mark Sloan, leaned in before the session began, his voice low enough to keep from echoing. "They're going to block everything. Don't swing at every pitch, wait for the one that counts." I nodded, though I could already feel the weight of the day pressing against my ribs. Judge Vance entered from the side door, his robe hanging perfectly, eyes scanning the room with the precision of a man checking the battlefield before taking position. My father watched him like a general watching a loyal officer take command. They didn't need to speak. The alliance was written in every shared glance, every subtle shift of posture. It began predictably. The plaintiff's counsel moved to introduce a stack of reports unsigned, unverified. Sloan objected, citing lack of foundation. "Overruled," Vance replied, barely looking up from his bench. Another motion, another overrule. It was a script, and they were reading their lines flawlessly. I kept my hands flat on the table, forcing my shoulders to stay square. In my years of service, I'd been in rooms where silence meant life or death, where a single twitch could give away your position. This was no different. The prosecution painted me as reckless, insubordinate, unfit to inherit my mother's estate. Every sentence was a twist of the knife. They skirted the edges of the mission in Karath Province, what they called Operation Iron Jackal, never giving the full picture. Only the edited version they'd been rehearsing for years. I could feel the heat of my father's gaze. He didn't flinch when they described me as a liability, as if he'd been waiting for someone else to say it so he wouldn't have to. I thought about the way he used to look at me when I came home from deployment, measuring me, not for the weight I'd carried, but for the way I carried it. I glanced toward the gallery. Most faces were unreadable, but a few, a colonel near the back, a young lieutenant jotting notes with almost aggressive precision. They were watching more closely than they should have. Sloan caught my eye, a quick shake of the head. Not yet. But the truth was already shifting under their feet. It had been 3 years since Iron Jackal, but the memory never loosened its grip. Some nights it came in fragments, shouts over the comms, the sharp metallic scent of blood, the way the dust clung to our skin. Other nights it replayed from start to finish, each decision echoing like a shot fired in a canyon. We were briefed in a windowless room 2 hours before sunset. The objective was clear on paper: extract a humanitarian doctor, and 2 local aides from a breakaway cell. Satellite stills showed a crumbling warehouse on the edge of Karath's river district. The intel was neat. Tidy, too tidy? I noticed it right away. 2 timestamps that didn't match the weather logs. Thermal signatures that looked like they'd been lifted from a training manual. A delivery truck parked at a door that didn't exist in the overhead images. I raised my concerns, asked for a second human source to confirm. The request was denied. We launched at dusk. My team of 6 moved like clockwork, each step rehearsed, each man exactly where he needed to be. The first door was unlocked. The second swung open without resistance. My gut clenched. The blast came from the wrong quadrant. A shaped charge in the support pillar turned concrete into shrapnel. Morales went down first, then Kent. The mezzanine erupted with muzzle flashes from positions we'd never been briefed on. I called the abort, shifting to a fallback route I'd marked hours earlier, but every move cost us another man. By the time I dragged Bishop through the drainage cut, my left palm was split open, glass embedded deep. I still feel that scar every time I close my hand. The official report labeled it a tragic miscalculation. They buried the anomalies, erased the requests I'd made before we launched, and when the families asked what happened, they were given a version that left no room for doubt except for me. In that courtroom, with my father staring holes through me, I knew Iron Jackal wasn't over, and Night Falcon was the thread that could unravel it all. The prosecution had just finished parading another so-called expert, someone who had never set foot in Korath province, when Judge Vance leaned forward, pen tapping against the bench. "Commander Hughes," he said, drawing out the title as if it tasted bitter. "Your record speaks for itself. And frankly, it's not flattering. I didn't rise to the bait. The trick in combat and in court was the same: don't give the enemy the reaction they're hunting for." He motioned for the clerk to read an excerpt from an unsigned memo that described me as reckless and emotionally compromised. Sloan objected again and was overruled again. The rhythm was as predictable as the tick of the courtroom clock. I glanced at my father. His expression was carved from the same granite it had been all morning, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, the faintest ghost of a smile. This was his moment. He thought the case was locked, the outcome inevitable. That was the moment I decided it was time. I pushed back my chair. The sound echoed across the chamber, drawing eyes from every row of the gallery. My steps to the lectern were slow, deliberate years of briefing rooms and tactical debriefs, teaching me that sometimes the silence before you speak is more dangerous than the words themselves. I let my hands rest on the wood, the scar on my left palm catching the light. I met no one's eyes, but I spoke clearly, each syllable measured. Night Falcon. It was as if the air itself had been sucked from the room. The colonel in the back straightened, pen frozen above his notepad. A civilian near the aisle slid his phone into his pocket without looking at it. The young lieutenant stopped writing altogether. Gaze locked on me. Across the aisle, my father's jaw tightened. His fingers flexed against the armrest, like a man suddenly unsure of the ground beneath him. Judge Vance blinked. "Once! Twice! What did you just say?" I repeated it. And then the storm began to move. The second time I said it, something broke in the air quietly, but completely. Judge Vance's knuckles whitened around the gavel. He didn't strike it. Instead, his gaze darted toward my father, a flicker of unspoken calculation passing between them. My father's eyes narrowed, but for once, he had nothing ready to say. From the gallery, movement rippled outward like a wave. The colonel I'd clocked earlier stood, murmuring into a secure handset. 2 men in suits left through the side door, one of them flashing a badge I hadn't seen in years. A petty officer near the back crossed himself so quickly it was almost invisible. Vance cleared his throat. "This tribunal will recess for 60 minutes. The words were tight, almost reluctant. The gavel finally came down, not as a declaration, but as an escape. Chairs scraped against the floor. Officers filed out in 2s and 3s, some with eyes fixed on me, others deliberately looking anywhere else. Sloane stayed seated, stacking his files in neat, deliberate motions, letting the chaos swirl without him. I stepped back from the lectern, the adrenaline settling into a low, steady burn. My father rose from his chair, crossing the aisle faster than I expected. "What did you just do?" he asked. Voice low, taut as a tripwire. "By the time you figure it out," I said, keeping my tone level, "it'll be too late." He glanced toward the chamber doors, where Vance still hadn't reappeared. Something new crept into his face, doubt. The colonel from the gallery appeared in the doorway, speaking quietly to Sloane, then nodded once in my direction before disappearing again. It was a signal I hadn't seen in years, one that told me the next move wasn't mine anymore. I pressed my thumb into the scar in my palm, grounding myself. Iron Jackal's ghosts were awake now, and they weren't going back to sleep. When the tribunal resumed, I knew the room would not belong to Vance, or to my father. It would belong to the people who understood exactly what Night Falcon meant, and that was the point. When the side door opened again, it wasn't Judge Vance who stepped through. It was Admiral Elaine Mercer, her uniform immaculate, her presence filling the room before she even reached the bench. The low murmur in the gallery died instantly. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she stood behind the bench, glancing at the clerk. "Record that I am presiding under delegated authority from the Office of the Secretary of the Navy and the Joint Chiefs," she said. Her voice crisp, every syllable deliberate. My father shifted in his seat, confusion flickering across his face. He'd played enough political games to recognize when the rules had changed and when he was no longer the one writing them. Mercer laid a stack of portfolios on the bench and opened the top one. "This matter is dissolved in its current form," she said. "All filings associated with Docket 1843 are now classified. Parties will surrender notes and unofficial copies to the bailiff for secure disposition." 2 security officers moved down the aisles, collecting documents from attorneys and observers alike. The young lieutenant from earlier stepped forward to assist, now wearing a badge from Naval Intelligence. She didn't look at me, but her movements were precise, almost surgical. Mercer continued, "The court recognizes that actions taken by Commander Hughes during Operation Iron Jackal were consistent with standing rules of engagement and mission authority. Effective immediately, contested assets are to be released to the beneficiary named in the will of Elaine Hughes." Hearing my mother's name spoken in that room was like feeling sunlight after weeks of rain. I kept my expression steady, but inside, the tight coil I'd been carrying began to loosen. My father inhaled sharply, as if about to argue, then caught Mercer's eye. Whatever he saw there convinced him to shut his mouth. "This session is concluded under seal," Mercer finished, closing the portfolio with a quiet finality that left no room for appeal. The bailiff opened the main doors, and the corridor's cooler air swept in. I gathered my files, their weight different, now not evidence for defense, but proof of victory. For the first time in years, the balance had shifted. The crowd in the hallway thinned as Mercer's entourage moved toward the secured wing. I lingered near the wall, letting the tide of uniforms and dark suits flow past me. My father didn't. He cut through the space between us with the urgency of a man who'd just watched his grip on the board slip away. He stopped close enough that I could see the fine stitching along the edge of his cuff. "You think this is over?" His voice was low, but the edge was still there, an edge honed over decades of command and manipulation. "No," I said. "It's just begun." His jaw tightened. "You could have handled this privately, like family." I took a step toward him, refusing to give ground. "Family ended when you signed your name to their silence, when you traded my reputation for whatever they promised you, for the first time all day." He looked away. It wasn't shame exactly, more like the discomfort of being seen without his armor. "They said if I kept quiet, you'd avoid a dishonorable discharge, that you'd keep your commission and your pension. I thought you thought wrong." I cut in. You thought you could protect the legacy by burying the truth. But you weren't protecting me. Dad. You were protecting yourself. His eyes snapped back to mine. A flash of something anger, maybe, or the realization that I wasn't going to flinch. You have no idea what I've lost because of this. You're right, I said, my tone flat, because what I lost can't be counted in invitations or handshakes. I buried 6 men because someone fed us lies, and you helped make sure those lies stayed clean. He didn't speak. For a moment, the noise in the corridor seemed to fade, leaving just the two of us standing there, locked in a quiet war. I let the silence hang, then stepped back. I'm done explaining myself to you. His fingers flexed at his side, but he didn't reach for me. He just watched as I turned and walked toward the secured door, the scar in my palm warm against the papers I carried. The truth was out of his hands now. Admiral Mercer was waiting in a smaller conference room, its blinds drawn tight and the air smelling faintly of coffee gone cold. She gestured to the chair opposite her. Sit, Commander. I closed the door behind me and took the seat, placing my files on the table. You shook the right tree today, she said. Now we see what falls out. I studied her face. Mercer wasn't the type to waste words, and the gravity in her tone told me this wasn't just about clearing my name. We've confirmed what you suspected about Iron Jackal, she continued. Intelligence was manipulated satellite imagery altered, human sources suppressed, and a false positive fed into the pipeline. The compartment it ran through was dissolved 6 months later, but the architect is still active. I felt my hand curl, the scar in my palm stretching. You have a name. Not one I can give you yet, she said. But I have authority to form a task unit to identify and neutralize the threat. Off the books. Fully sanctioned. But you choose the roster. You set the tempo. Her eyes held mine. I want you to lead it. I leaned back, measuring her offer. No middlemen. I answer directly to you. Agreed. And my people full benefits for their families. Education, housing, medical. No loopholes. No cut corners. Her mouth lifted at one corner. You don't start small, do you? Not when it matters. She nodded. Done. For a moment. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the HVAC. Then she slid a sealed folder across the table. Preliminary intel. Burn after reading. I placed my hand on it, but didn't open it. This isn't about getting my record back. Is it? No, she said. This is about making sure no one else buries 6 of their own, because someone needed a win on paper. I slipped the folder into my bag and stood. If Iron Jackal had been the ambush, this was the counterattack, and I was done waiting. When I left the courthouse, the air felt sharper, cleaner, as if the city itself had shifted with the verdict. The tribunal had ended under seal, my record restored, my mother's estate returned. But the real victory wasn't written in any transcript. It was in knowing that Night Falcon had cracked open something far bigger than a courtroom battle. Admiral Mercer's offer stayed with me on the drive home. A new unit, my choice of people, the authority to hunt the architect of Iron Jackal. It wasn't redemption I was after, it was prevention. No one else was going to walk blind into a trap because someone needed a statistic to look good on a report. I started making calls that night. Men and women tied by blood or memory to the 6 I'd lost. People who understood what it meant to carry the weight of the fallen and still move forward. Each yes on the other end of the line stitched a piece of Iron Jackal back together, not to rewrite the past, but to make the future answer for it. A week later, we met in a secure facility, the kind where cell signals die before you cross the threshold. I set a small metal tag on the table, our name etched into the steel sentinel shade. We keep watch for the ones who can't. I told them. When the first mission file slid across the table, the patterns in the intel were all too familiar. The same fingerprints that had written Iron Jackal were here, daring us to follow. I pressed my thumb into the scar in my palm, a reminder of where this started and why it could never happen again. Justice hadn't ended in that courtroom. It had only just begun.